Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance UK webinar. We're so pleased to have with us Santosh and Ravi Kumar, and thank you also for joining us today. My name is Nisha Thapliyal, and I will be one of your co-hosts for the conversation today. I would like to start by acknowledging the country that we're joining from to have this conversation. We acknowledge the land, waterways, and airways of the many First Nations on which we work, study, live, and gather for this event, including the traditional custodians of the Dharawal and Kulin nations. We would like to pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. We would like to pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may have joined us today. Hello again, and welcome to the Educate, Organize, Resist webinar series. My name again is Nisha Thapliyal. I'm an academic in the School of Education at the University of Newcastle, and this is the 6th webinar, I think, in our series that we've held this year. And this project is part of a larger research project that I began last year on activism for social justice in the Indian diaspora. And it's been my privilege and honor to meet some incredible activists in the course of this research. And some of them, like Santosh and Ravi, have very kindly agreed to also join this webinar and talk to a larger community. So that's a little bit about myself. I will now ask my co-host Mudit to introduce himself.
Hello everyone. My name is Mudit. I am also I'm joining from Melbourne, which is also known as which was originally known as Naam by the indigenous people here. And I am originally from India, from Rajasthan, the land of the Meena and the Bhil people. I study at a university here in Melbourne, and my research is on studying the use of art. I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I study the usage of art as a way of diversity washing the settlerism of non-white people in Australia, especially South Asian people. And yeah, I have been assisting Nisha with this research and archival work for almost 4 or 5 months now. And yeah, I'm hoping that this will go amazingly well. Let's go ahead. Thanks.
Thanks, Mudit. This wouldn't be possible without you. You're being far too humble. Thank you. A little about the webinar series for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. As I said, this is a series that comes out of a larger research project. My research interests have to do with education for social justice and collective forms of activism for social justice. And so this series came out of the idea that we wanted activists and scholars from around the Indian diaspora to talk to us here in Australia about their collective wisdom around struggles for human rights, democracy, social justice, and peace in relation to the issues faced by the Indian diaspora. And we've had some really dynamic webinars so far with speakers sharing a wealth of knowledge and strategies about what collective struggle looks like, what activism looks like, and we're about to have one of those very inspiring conversations today. If you're interested, you can go to our YouTube channel to watch some of our previous webinars. We started with Biju Matthew, who spent 3 or 4 decades doing this work. Then we had Dr. Radha D'Souza and Adrija Day from the UK talking about their social justice activism. And we've also had Dr. Sangeeta Kamath and Isha Pandit talking about their critical education initiatives in the US to educate around issues of racism, patriarchy, casteism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and so forth. This webinar that we're about to have today is the second in our series on struggles against casteism in the Indian diaspora. I think this quote from Baba Saheb is very familiar to many of us. He warned us that, when Indians migrated around the world, the problem of caste would become a world problem. And that's certainly very true today. But I also like this other quote of his, where he says, all are slaves of the caste system, but all the slaves are not equal in status. And for me, that's a reminder about the very complex nature of oppression, right? And while many of us have experienced different kinds of oppression, we often fall into the trap of assuming that it's a shared experience. And that's certainly not the case when it comes to the caste system created by Brahminical patriarchy. And so we've had one conversation last month on unlearning casteism, where an incredible group of educators came together, all based here in Australia, to talk about how they approach this educational work. And next, at the end of this month, we'll have Tenmuri Soundarajan from Equality Labs joining us as well. And today, of course, we're in for a real treat. We're going to be talking to the co-founders of Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance. I first learned about them in relation to a groundbreaking report that they produced almost 10 years ago now, called Hidden Apartheid, which exposed, I think for the first time in the history of the UK, the reality of caste discrimination in the Indian diaspora there. And I'm not going to talk about it because I'm quite sure Santosh and Ravi will, but as someone who's interested in activist research, this is when I first learned about the work of ACDA, but that's just one piece of the incredible amount of work they've done since they were formed in 2008. And again, I'll try and do a very short introduction for both Santosh and Ravi here, but I know that this in no way captures the thousands of hours, days, weeks, and years that both of them have voluntarily put into this work. This is clearly something that cannot be captured with a few words on a slide, but just to get us started, Santosh is a former civil servant who has been involved with the campaign to outlaw caste-based discrimination in the UK for nearly 20 years. She was one of the founding members of Caste Watch UK in 2003 and ACDA in 2008. She is currently the president of the Federation of Ambedkarite and Buddhist Organizations UK, and she was appointed MBE in the 2007 Queen's Birthday Honours List. I think Santosh was shy to mention this, but I think she also played a pivotal role in the purchase of Ambedkar House. Ravi is another person who has devoted his life to this work. He is a founding member of both the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance and Caste Watch UK. He is the current General Secretary of ACDA, and he has a particular interest in subaltern studies, cultural anthropology, Dalit and Adivasi empowerment, and accessing the United Nations. Ravi works in economic regeneration with a focus on innovation, healthcare, infrastructure, connectivity, 5G, and digital strategies. We were supposed to be joined by one other founding member of ACDA, Lake Rajpal. He unfortunately cannot join us today, but he sends us our best wishes, and our speakers will talk about him a little bit. And with that, Jai Bhim, Jai Savitri, and I'm very honored and privileged to turn the mic over to Santosh and Ravi. Thanks for taking time out of your busy lives to talk to us so far away on the other side of the world. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it. Thank you, and over to you.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, whichever part of the world you're in. It's a beautiful morning in London here. Nisha and Mudat and the Educate, Organize and Resist team, thank you for inviting the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance to share our work and our thoughts with you. I hope our long campaign and the challenges that we face to outlaw caste-based discrimination in the UK may provide useful markers to people who are learning about struggles to do with equality and human rights, because essentially this is what our campaign has been about dignity and human rights. The title of the EOR webinar series is interesting. It's not so far removed from the slogan, educate, agitate, and organize. The great Indian social reformer and economic reformer, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar used. And Dr. Ambedkar may well have been influenced by George Bernard Shaw, the Anglo-Irish playwright and social activist. He described the Fabian Society's mission as one to educate, agitate, and organize. And those of you who don't know about the Fabian Society in Britain, is the oldest political think tank founded in 1884. And it's based on a very socialist and left agenda. For me, the slogan is a living and breathing movement. So when we use these slogans, I think they touch us and they ask us to think about what it is that we really want to achieve. And I think slogans are incredibly important. And these slogans are educating men and women through education to equip themselves and organize themselves in order to be able to raise their voice and agitate against wrongs and disparities and discrimination that they face. And my education, I've lived in Britain most of my life. I came to London as a very small girl from India, from a small village in Punjab, very, very protected from a lot of discrimination and all those things, because I had a very sort of closed environment that I grew up in. And my education here in the UK became one of lived experience of racism in Britain as a young child, being called all sorts of names and being told to go home and all of those things. And then, trying to understand the sort of the equality and human rights struggles around the world. And as a young child in the early 70s, being played a song in school called The Streets of London by Ralph McTell, a singer-songwriter, folk singer-songwriter. And I met him, about 20 years ago, actually, and I was just awestruck when I told him that I'd learned this song in music class. And the song is all about the struggles of the working people, the unemployed, the hungry. So if you haven't heard the song, please go and see it. And then, of course, there was Bob Dylan's Blowing in the Wind, again, challenging, society. So sometimes these things, sort of take over part of your life, don't they? They ask you to question things. And of course, Bonnie Dobson, the Canadian folk singer and songwriter, and her song Morning Dew, about the last man and woman being asked to take a walk after a nuclear holocaust, and all around, where the Vietnam War was taking us. So all of those things are things that awaken us, awaken our education, and they certainly woke my education on human rights and equality and these issues. And of course, we were taught about Martin Luther King and, the civil rights movement, and in Africa, Dr. Nelson Mandela's struggle against apartheid, and how there are all sorts of people and nations rallying behind this struggle, which was incredible, to make that happen. And we're not saying that people aren't still suffering post-apartheid, but I think that struggle for freedom and the inequalities of, what was apartheid, and the divisions and the social divisions and the inhumanity around that is something, that kind of, touched me a lot. And then in the 90s, when I became aware of the struggle in, the Namada, Bachao and Dolan, with Medha Patekar, sitting there trying to, in the face of people, the corporates wanting to build the dam, the Namada Dam project, which ended up in displacing hundreds of thousands of people, and tribal people and advocacy people. And you acknowledge quite rightly, that the university is sitting on the lands of the First Nations. And that's incredibly important. And then the struggle of Soni Suri and Chhattisgarh against the police brutality following, the sort of the protests that she when she raised her voice against open mining and the impact of big business basically encroaching on tribal land. And so all of these things are kind of like the background to kind of what brought me to where we are with the caste law movement. And one of the things that one of the books that I want to refer to right at the outset, because we worked with this person later on the caste law movement, and I think it kind of sums up where we need to be on any equality and any human rights movement, is that Anthony Lester and Jeffrey Bindman, in their book Race and Law, covers the history of race law in Britain from 1968 and onwards. And this is a living and breathing document. The whole race equality laws that we've got in the UK, and race laws and all the equality laws he saw as being one where we promoted equality of treatment, but also the equality of opportunity. And I think that is fundamental to everything, when we're fighting for equality. But then he does have a very, very cautionary tale. And this book is from the early 70s. And I just like to quote this. And he says, race relations cannot be properly understood in contemporary Britain without an awareness of the inheritance of racial attitudes from the imperial age. So he acknowledged that, the prejudice is ingrained, and that no matter what we do with the laws, you need to socially change society as well. And that is what Dr. Ambedkar talked about when he talked about, sort of banning untouchability and outlawing untouchability as part of the as part of the constitution that he was instrumental in introducing and writing. But also that actually you have to do a social, do some work on the ground to make things happen and things change. And now challenging the attitudes of the imperial age has become a feature in the UK in the equality movement, particularly in light of the George Floyd murder in America in 2015. And it seems like only yesterday, but for the UK, it's like the pulling down of statues of slave traders or demanding that they be removed. It's the calls for the removal of medals given to UK diplomats that depict an image of a white angel stamping on the foot, stamping its foot on a young Black person's back. And it's the England football team taking, the players taking the knee before a match. And these are the actions that are reported and shared on social media, and has made the campaign visible, the Black Lives Matter campaign. But in the context of caste discrimination, our campaign is no different. We are challenging, the millennia or thousands of years of inhuman wrongs done and continue to be done to groups of people in India who happened to have been born into a particular caste or outside of caste as untouchables. And now we have caste, and it might be quite subtle, and caste discrimination that has followed this Indian subcontinent diaspora to whichever corner of the world they settle in numbers. If they're by themselves, they're okay, but if they start settling in numbers, and we've seen what's happening in America, we've seen what's happening in Canada, and no doubt we will see a lot more happening in Europe as well. Britain has been kind of at the forefront of a lot of the campaign, but mark my words, this will follow in Germany, Italy, wherever the diaspora settles. So a little bit about the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance. We were formed in 2008. We're an independent and a non-profit making voluntary organization. We all give our time for free, and because we're passionate about this cause. And we all are together, people like Ravi and myself and others in our team, because Lek, Rajchand and others, is because we share common goals and hold similar views on equality and promoting equality. And our vision is when we don't think we're asking for too much, but our vision is a world without caste and caste discrimination. And we want everyone to be able to achieve their full potential without social and economic barriers. And we want everyone to be free to live safely and with dignity. And I really don't believe that is too much to ask for in a society, or even too much to strive for. And that, so our, we hold our hands up, we don't ask for much. And the way we work is essentially through monitoring and opposing practices and policies that perpetuate caste discrimination and harassment and Dalitophobia in Britain and around the world. And we do this by planning strategies and carrying out research to eradicate it. On a day-to-day basis, the ACDA supports victims and those who suffer from caste-based discrimination. We challenge discriminatory practices in organizations. We introduce coordination between groups and organizations lobbying for legal protection against caste-based discrimination. And we carry out research and I'll touch on that a little bit, and I'm sure Ravi will talk a little bit more about it. And you mentioned our report in 2008, which is incredibly timely because we were going through the passage of the equality legislation at the time. And we initiate and organize joint statements, parliamentary questions, briefings to parliamentarians here in the UK who can make a difference, and to community and organize public protests when required to make an impact. And we lobby external bodies like the UN, for example, on legal protection for victims, but we do lobby other NGOs as well to come on our side. And recently we've just done some work with the Runnymede Trust on their feedback to the UN on equality issues, but also we've asked them to include the issue of caste that should be picked up. Now, when we are united and our calls for legal protection in Britain, the Hindu Council and the Hindu Forum of Britain, when we made calls for legislation, the Hindu Council and the Hindu Forum of Britain responded by producing reports on caste in Britain to government. And this was all going on in 2008, around the time when a lot of calls for this was being made as part of a consultation on the Single Equality Bill in the UK. And the Hindu Council report, a summary of consultation with the Hindu community in Britain, included a lengthy section on the origins of the caste system, but it denied the existence of caste discrimination in the UK, other than, they said, in marriages and relationships, and they think that's okay. And I think everybody should be entitled to marry whoever they want, essentially, and if that's the way they feel about it, that's fine. The Hindu Forum of Britain's report, The Caste System, also published the same year in 2008, was similar. And quite interestingly, both of these reports are not available on their websites. We've been looking, I'm not even sure if it's even available anywhere, but if people want copies, I think I have a PDF somewhere of at least one of the reports. And in our report, in our research, A Hidden Apartheid, we quote on page 5 what the Hindu scriptures are about and what the caste system is about. But we, you know, about Brahmins and Kshatriya and Vaishyas and Shudras and so on. And we lifted that from the Hindu Forum report. But now the narrative has changed. They won't even talk about it, you know. So in 2008, 13 years ago, they could kind of talk about it quite proudly. And now they're trying to, you know, the narrative is trying to change from them not accepting it and that it's all an imperialistic kind of you know, sort of construct, and that the British imported it, you know, imported the caste system, and that that this is a narrative, you know, that they're pushing, which is quite interesting for us. So the first time the government in the UK really said anything about caste discrimination was in 2008, and it was in response to the consultation responses. And basically, I'll just give you a line on that. While recognizing that caste discrimination is unacceptable, we have found no strong evidence of such discrimination in Britain in the context of employment or provision of goods and service facilities or services. And we would, however, consult the Equalities and Human Rights Commission about monitoring the position. And this was in July of 2008. And no doubt the Hindu Forum, the Hindu Council, and all the other people who are lobbying against it were probably saying, job done. And of course, we were disappointed. And this is why we conducted some research of our own. And in 2009, we published our report, A Hidden Apartheid, Voice of the Community. And we had over 300 people who input into this. It was a very, very quick study. We had a 4-week online questionnaire, which we analyzed the responses to. Over 100 people responded to that. And we had 9 focus groups around the country. So people could tell us about their experiences, because people want to tell you, but they don't always have the forum to talk about their lived experiences. And a majority of the research participants identified negative experiences of caste discrimination in the UK. And for some, this had been a traumatizing effect or impact on them. You know, low morale, low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, economic impacts, negative economic impacts, where some people just left their jobs, or they just felt like they had to kind of put up or shut up, basically. And just some headline figures, you know, for the 4-week survey, 9% of the 100 people who responded on the online survey, 9% said that they'd missed promotion at work. 9% said they'd experienced verbal abuse. 7% of under 12-year-olds in school said that they'd faced threatening behavior, and 16% verbal abuse. Now, you can go into the details of it, and I think you know, we had examples of an elderly lady in the north of England who hadn't been looked after very well by her carer, who was a so-called high caste. We had a teenage girl who was constantly bullied and taunted in school. We had you know, when you think about the economic impacts, you had a bus company in the south of England, you know, where the white English managers changed the shift rotas so that a Dalit bus driver or Dalit bus drivers would only work with Dalit bus conductors. I mean, this is in England. And since the success of the 2000, you know, I mean, the campaign's been carrying on, you know, since 2000. We've had a section 9(5)(a) in the Equality Act that allows a minister, UK minister, to add caste as a protected characteristic. Now, in 2013, that became a duty. You know, whilst it was before, it was may, now it's a duty. And because there's been a huge lobby against this law, they organize themselves, the Hindus organize themselves under the Alliance of Hindu Organizations. And they're resisting, you know, this law. Ravi will probably talk a lot more about that. But, you know, they've kind of become incredibly, like I was talking about changing the narrative, you know, where they're trying to talk about, you know, it being a British import. At the same time, the narrative has gone from one which was about caste discrimination to discrimination against caste. So, you know, if we're discriminating against caste, then we're discriminating against Hindus, say. But caste doesn't exist just in Hinduism. It's there in Sikhism. It's there in Islam. It's there, whether people accept that or not, in Christianity. So, you know, it's not just one group of people. It's wherever you've got societies that base their interactions on descent-based mechanisms. So the language, like I was saying, has changed. They talk about not wanting the caste law because they believe that the caste law would change the caste consciousness, you know, that doesn't exist in Britain. But actually, you know, if you've got temples and gurdwaras that are named after castes, you've got marriage websites, you know, that have algorithms, you know, that was recently reported, you know, based on caste. You've got, you know, charities. You know, in the UK charities list, you can go on the website and you can see you've got a Brahmin society, you've got a Ravidasya society, you've got, you know, you've got a Jat society, and you know, and these charities are listed. So those people who are telling me that actually, you know, it doesn't exist, then we know it. You know, you can go around the country in the UK, whether it's Scotland, you know, in the United Kingdom, I should say, whether it's Scotland, Wales, or England, you know, for sure. And in 2018, the government announced that it wouldn't implement the 2013 law. And basically, they argue that caste is already covered in existing law under race, under descent. And but you know, if it's covered and without the relevant guidance and the statutory guidance, then we've still got caste discriminations that keep coming up. And that, you know, maybe you know, I'll talk a little bit about it, you know, if you want later. But you know, we've got caste discrimination surfacing in the National Health Service, you know, on the social media, you know, in the workplace, and you know, recently we got a leaflet withdrawn from an NHS website about treating a Hindu patient, which was really, really derogatory in its language about untouchables and, you know, about Harijans, and, you know, the sort of language that doesn't even get used now, I think, in India, even Harijans. You know, basically saying, you know, you know, these people should not touch this patient. But can you imagine if it's a doctor or a nurse that's from that community? You know, where does that kind of like leave you? And we got that leaflet as soon as we raised this with the NHS. And it was a very, very large NHS trust dealing with lots and lots of hospitals. And as soon as we raised this, they withdrew it straight away, and they apologized for causing offense. But it had crept in. You know, we supported a woman who got shouted at by a Sikh colleague and outed, you know, as a Dalit, you know, where she regarded herself as a, you know, as a Sikh, and why should she be called out and told that she's a dirty so-and-so, you know, in public, and then harassed, and the company not do anything about it until we picked up the case. And in May this year, with the Ravidasya community, you know, the ACDA saw through the prosecution, and we were one of the witnesses, the prosecution of a London-based Sikh man who produced and shared a hate-filled, caste-related diatribe on TikTok, you know, and he received a 16-week prison sentence that was suspended unless he reoffends for in the next 2 years, I think it is. So maybe he might reoffend, you know, because he you know, he may. So the caste isn't just limited, you know, to Hindus, and you know, we've got you know, we supported another case that actually went to a tribunal, and that was relating to Hindu people. So at an international level, we've supported our friends in America, on the Cisco case where, when there was a statement done by the Ambedkarites there, the ACDA were signatories to that statement to the courts to explain what caste is meant and how it plays out in practice. And there's a similar case going on in Canada at the moment. And we've raised also alongside this, the ACDA regularly raises its voice against atrocities against Dalits and tribal people, and more recently on the incarceration of men and women that have been incarcerated in the Bhima Corrigan case. So our campaign is about unity, with the team having a passion about what it is that we do. Being very, very, I believe integrity is absolutely the key. So the things that we do, when we say that we will do them, we deliver quickly. Recently, was invited to give some briefing to a member of the Lords for a debate on India's human rights, and that was on the 28th of July. And we were able to provide that briefing, and because those members of the Lords have confidence in what we do, and that we provide briefings based on evidence, that they're happy to raise those concerns for us. And also, I believe, using the powers that we have from our own experience, that Ravi has in social media, I have from being quite senior in the Department of Health and having worked on better regulation and knowing how ministers like their briefings and how parliamentarians like their briefings. It's become kind of like second nature to us to work in that way. And I'd just like to end here by saying that, our campaign is a pro-equality campaign. It's not against any particular, religion or groups, but what we do want to do is to try and change behavior. And we believe that the legislation here in the UK is important. Caste discrimination is no different from race discrimination. Race discrimination is outlawed here in this country. So should caste discrimination. So I'm happy to take questions at the end after Ravi's spoken.
Thank you very much, Santosh Ji. A very comprehensive account of what we've been doing here, ACDA. And I mean, as many of you on this call will probably be aware, there's a tremendous amount of activity and effort that goes into working with our communities, behind the scenes, the thousands of hours that it takes to bring different organizations together collectively to have a shared vision. It's not easy. It does take a lifetime, to be honest, and I started in this game as a relatively young man coming into it, where my friends and colleagues were going to nightclubs, and having fun, whereas I was really interested in who I was, where I came from, and how I could empower my community. And I do recall, actually, I was doing some work experience at the Guardian newspaper where they'd offered me a job. And recently I had started volunteering at my local Guru Ravidas temple. So, as a Dalit growing up, that was the temple that my family went to. And so it's quite insightful, actually, because, the way that communities have grown up in the UK organically has also been in response to caste discrimination. So as Santosh mentioned, when the migrants first came to here in the UK in the 50s and the 60s, we all used to club together. We used to kind of live in the same homes, put money together to purchase a property, which would be the first community temple. Once those temples grew, the caste discrimination appeared, things like you're not allowed to serve in the kitchen, you're not allowed to be on the management committee, quickly came to the front. And as a result, the Dalit communities who had their dignity set up their own institutions. So Dalit identity in the UK has also been in response to caste discrimination that they've experienced. So I was keen to learn more about my own community, volunteering for the Guru Ravidas Temple in Birmingham, and learning about our history and about Punjabis in general. And I remember somebody had given me a newsletter about the struggle of Dalits. which really I hadn't been exposed to. I was aware that we were considered so-called, low caste untouchable. Didn't really know what that meant really. But it was when I was sitting in that bench outside the Guardian newspaper around the corner from the offices, and I was reading about all the vicious and pernicious, crimes that are committed against Dalits, women, the rapes that they experience, men, the social boycotts. And the organization that had written this newsletter was right in front of me. I looked up and I saw the address, Amwell Street, and it was a fortunate stroke of luck. So I was able to cross the street and make connection with some Dalit organizations there, who then introduced me to a number of activists across the country. So something I want to touch on, because I think Santosh has covered in quite detail the work we've been doing around caste discrimination and the legislation, is that essentially when we started out, it was always a pro-equality approach. We were focused around ourselves as Dalits. We wanted to improve our lot, to ensure that we were getting our fair and equitable share of resources. Australia and other parts of the world will probably be similar to the UK. If there are government grants or regeneration budgets, they're often distributed on a local level, and then you have community groups that apply for it. And what we found was that often Dalit organizations were included as one of the number, but we never actually received anything. So you had other, groups that were saying, oh, the Guru Ravidas temple is part of the Sikh organization or maybe a Hindu organization, but we never really received anything. So we were keen to empower our own community so that they could access their resources that they were entitled to. We work and live in this country, we pay taxes, and it's only fair that we also have a helping hand when need. So we discovered it was, first of all, initially difficult. So, panelists and people on this call here, attendees, it's not easy bringing all our different groups together because we have a rich and vibrant culture. India is a massive country, and Dalits, span the whole of the country. I mean, in my view, we are the indigenous people of India, along with advocacies as well. And so we have a rich heritage. And so there's a lot of diversity amongst us. So bringing us together isn't an easy feat. So that's one thing I've realized, is that we should certainly make efforts to come together on a pan-Dalit platform if you can. If anything, that's the only thing that has worked, because once you start going down a particular route, if you say we're all going to come together under a particular religion, it doesn't really work, but what we are is a pan-ethnic group, if you want to call it, look at it in that view, a bit like African Americans. You could say the Dalits, we are an ethnic group, right? We have that common heritage as well. So bringing ourselves together, it isn't easy, but in my view, it's the way that we have to strive to, because we have to stake our claim. Nobody else is going to do that for us. And as Santosh mentioned, when we started this, it was pro-equality. And the one thing I noticed actually was that the Indian communities don't work together, closely here in the UK. It's like they work in isolation. So for example, we weren't really concerned about what was happening with other Indian communities or the Hindu community or the Sikh community. We was concerned about our experience and the discrimination we were facing here in the UK. And so to have opposition to legislation we were pushing for to give us, dignity and protection was stunning for us. We were shocked. Like, why would anybody oppose this? We're not interfering with anybody or their cultures or their religion. So, it is interesting where you get opposition. And I think it's more symptomatic about Indians in general. We work in silos. There's no real unity, actually. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but that's something to be mindful of. So there's no real dialogue to say, well, why are you opposing this? What's your issue? It's got nothing to do with you. It's about protection. It's just people operate silently, and you can second guess why and what they're scared of. So that was something we had to learn in terms of the opposition that we faced and where it was coming from. One thing I realized as well is that it's important for Dalit communities to build alliances. Very important for us to do that, right? Be that political alliances or alliances with the wider community, working with other groups. So here in the UK, you've got a big Afro-Caribbean community, a Black African community. You have other South Asian communities as well, and European communities. Whoever's been discriminated against, it's good to create alliances, because what counts is that political influence. And having looked at other groups like the Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims, they have, especially the Muslims in the UK, have organized themselves very well when it comes politically. So Dalits, I think, suffer in that respect. And so it's something we should pay attention to, is developing and building our political alliances. It is a long-term struggle, but it's where you're going to see real gains. Santosh touched a little bit on helping the victims and what we do. And what she didn't mention was, you know, the hundreds of hours it takes, really, because we are unpaid volunteers. It's not like we get a massive salary at the end of the day. This is all done in our evenings and our weekends and our spare time, you know, and quality family time suffers as a result. So when you have a victim, as Santosh gave an example of that, you know, a small Punjabi woman who is being bullied in the workplace by a big burly Sikh, you know, it can have an impact on their mental health. You know, they need emotional support as well, mental support. And when you're not receiving funding or government grants, it can be very taxing on your time and very draining as well. So we're very passionate about this. We believe in helping our community as well. And that's why we're committed, you know, in helping the victims, but it's not easy. So the point I wanted to make is that, you know, if you're going to do similar support groups in other countries as well, bear that in mind. It's always great to have resources to begin with and think about the type of struggle you're going to come across, because, you know, it could be a thankless task in the end, but it does take hundreds of, you know, thousands of hours, especially when you're writing lobbying letters as well. So I think Santosh touched a lot on the campaign and some of the examples that we had of caste discrimination coming out. I'm assuming that there might be some juicy questions from the audience. So I think I might stop there and hand back over to yourself, Nisha, so you can maybe let some of the audience members ask questions if they want.
I was particularly, thank you. I was particularly interested in learning a little more about the lessons you've learned in the international space. You mentioned, you know, that you work at the local level, at the national level, and at the international level. So if you could elaborate a bit on the chat, particularly the United Nations space, which, you know, at one level is very inspiring because the idea of equality and human rights is a given, and yet human rights campaigning is not as simple as those of us who've done it know. It's a lot harder in practice. So if you could speak to that, and maybe to the realities of educating British politicians about caste, especially those who are not from a South Asian background. And both of those questions are coming from, you know, discussions we're having here, right? So there's just a general lack of knowledge here in Australia about caste. So we'd love to learn from you. So those are my two questions. Mudit, over to you.
I had one important question around the general culture in the UK, and what do you feel about how a minority of upper caste people across faiths manage to propagate a culture that becomes mainstream despite it being a culture of like a very tiny minority?
I don't mind starting with that, Santosh, if that's okay. It's interesting. I was having a call yesterday with a number of groups. I work a lot with the Indian Workers Association, Asian rationalists as well. And we were talking about media programs that would, you know, touch both an Eastern audience in Punjab and also British Punjabis here as well. And somebody made an interesting point, is that if you look at Punjabis in general, and I think this really also refers to Indian culture as well, it's often from the viewpoint of a so-called upper caste perspective. So Punjabi popular culture, Bhangra music, you know, drinking to excess, dancing, boisterousness, all about, you know, the landowning caste. You know, 10 to 15, 20 years ago, it was almost like taboo. You know, it was coming out and people were listening to this and there was a resistance, you know, people saying, we don't want to hear that in our weddings. You know, why are people boasting about their caste, you know, in popular music? Today, it's accepted as the norm. So any Bhangra album that's produced will have a Jat song in it, you know, and about the legacy of the Jats and, you know, the greatest drinkers and warriors and all the rest of it. And the consideration isn't being given in terms of, well, what about the non-Jats? I mean, Punjab is, you know, I mean, the biggest ethnic group in Punjab is the Dalits, you know, the indigenous people. We are 35 to 40% there, right? So culture is very influential. And what's been lacking is our own stories, our own culture, And I think now things like YouTube and social media is allowing Dalit groups, like you've got Dalit Camera, Dalit Voice as well, that have started to produce their own videos. And I think this is something we should be working on now, looking ahead to the next 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, here in the UK, we've had a few Dalit channels that have launched. You've got Conchi TV, and it's an incredible amount of energy and effort and money to create a, cable station, to keep it sustained as well. But it allows us to start focusing on our content, to start producing media content that reflects our daily lives and the issues that we have to go through, because you won't generally find that in Punjabi culture. You may occasionally, even in the news, they may touch on the atrocity that's happened to a girl or a man, or something that's happened to a religious leader, but they won't touch on the struggles that Dalits face in the village, having access to resources, access to land, right? Some of the incredible amount of difficulties they have when it comes to getting their children married, social boycotts that they face. And this is what's been lacking and missing. And I think if you look at what happened with the African American communities in America, you had a period in the 1960s and 70s called Black exploitation, where you had a number of, cult movies that were produced, which helped launch the media careers of many well-known international African Americans. And today, Blacks are fully, included in Hollywood. They've started to be recognized, but you've got, kind of legends really when it comes to making movies and films, and music is accepted, popularly accepted as popular culture now. Rap music, jazz music is accepted, whereas we haven't had that breakthrough in India from a Dalit perspective. So when it comes to the general culture that you referred to, Mudit, it has been that from an upper caste perspective, and that's something we have to challenge over the time.
Can I just continue on from that, actually, and then also take your question, Nisha, as well? Satpal Mumin's paper, Caste in Britain, in 2000, talks about, the media and, Jat sort of songs, and marriage sort of websites like mentioning sort of caste and so on. So this has been going, this dialogue has been going on for over like 20 years. But what's quite interesting is that, and I really, I totally support everything that Ravi is saying here, because I think, I'm bringing it back to Britain, essentially that's what your question was about, Mudit, was that, look, when it comes to the media, we have very little clout, because a lot of people, coming back to what our community, the Dalit community who's come here in the 50s or the 60s, a lot of these people were landless before that. They've got, and sort of generations and generations of being landless and not having any money, not being able to kind of, provide for themselves in a way that, the high caste always had the privileges, and they had the land, whether it's the Japs or the, the Brahmins, or the Brahmins may not necessarily have the land. But what I'm saying is that, you've had privilege and people who've not been privileged, and our community has generally come from those groups of people who haven't been privileged. So economically, they come here as economic migrants. They come with very little. My dad came with about £3 or £4 in his pocket, when he came to England in 1962. And then he was providing for people back home. And then he was, one of the first things he wanted to do was to build a house. And then he wanted to buy some land. And then he wanted to kind of educate us. So basically they were so busy with that. We're the first my generation, are the people who benefited from that and have been able to get educated and get good jobs and so on. But because we've had that, we've been behind, even in the struggle here, economic kind of parity here. A lot of our people haven't had that kind of privilege of being able to kind of have the money, to go off into politics and pay for their lordships and their, members, to become members of the Lords, or to become politicians, because that takes out lots of time, like Ravi, has said. These things take, political, spending time in politics takes up time. And what the other communities that are privileged have done is been able to be really, really active in getting their people into politics in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And they're the ones with the voice. We don't have the voice there. To our knowledge, there is only one Dalit MP in Parliament, and he hasn't disclosed it, yet. And then when it comes to the media, I think, that is incredibly important, because it's the media, whether you've got somebody who's a so-called high caste Hindu or a Sikh, writing for the Guardian or the Independent, are they going to pick up the story, about Dalit atrocities or what's happening here? No, the chances are that they'll probably brush it under the carpet. So very, very often we don't get the coverage that we do. And I think, our campaign, one of the things that kind of brought me to, that Caste Watch was formed from, was a radio program called Caste Divide in 2013. It was broadcast in April. 2003, I should say. And it was that long ago. And that talked, they interviewed different people from our community talking about their experiences. So what you've got are people who are kind of trying to catch up, in this area. And that program couldn't have been made, I believe, if it hadn't had somebody, who was from the Dalit community, who was working for the BBC radio, at the time as a researcher. So she managed to kind of get this kind of like a slip, sort of slip through, and that kind of almost created a movement. I hope that kind of answers your question a little bit, Madit. But now go on to Nisha's question about sort of like lobbying at the UN and with parliamentarians here. Now, the first time the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance went to the UN was in 2011. And I was actually working still in the Department of Health at the time. So I would have loved to have gone with my colleagues. Ravi went, Raj Chand went, Mr. Memmi went. I think there was somebody else, Sam Kalyan and so on. Now, that was the first time that I think these people had gone there and taken our issue of caste discrimination in the UK to the UN to lobby. We'd already submitted a paper to them, and you need to kind of submit a shadow paper, if you want a discussion kind of to take place. And what was really, I mean, Ravi will add to this, but what was really, really inspiring about that was that, you already had a group in the UN, working on, sort of like representing Dalits, working there and lobbying people. But actually, when it came to the crunch, it was that particular session of the UN meet. It was our team that did not only, sort of like, we did the shadow paper, the other organizations had done that as well. But actually, the lobbying was, presenting in a really, really powerful and confident way, to the rapporteurs who were there. At a meeting, and Dr. Rajchand did that. But also, like people like Mr. Memmi, from the Ravidasya community, who cornered, the Indian representative, the rapporteur, and just said, "Hang on a minute, like, why aren't you supporting us with this?" But in Hindi, in a language that that person could understand. And then at the other end, when the UN was discussing, and then there was a response on our calls to get them to make a recommendation to the UN, to the UK. The UK kind of gave a bland kind of response saying, yes, we will go out and consult and blah, 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 on that order, that power that we have already in law, Section 95A. And when it was coming back to me, working in London in my office in Whitehall, just a stone's throw from Parliament almost, I was being asked to give responses, immediate responses straight away that could be fed back into what our group's response was. So it's kind of like a team effort, where you have kind of men on the ground, and you have people at the back, and then you have good briefings. And you also asked a question about briefing the politicians here about caste parliamentarians. Now, like I said, I think it's really useful to have a background where I could see the way that they want the briefings and the way they like to read papers. But I think one of the biggest difficulties that we had and Ravi may want to add to it, was that, you know, a lot of parliamentarians and the Brits who hadn't been there, you know, don't have connections with, you know, with the British Raj, you know, where they might have experienced or witnessed caste discrimination, because people like Churchill said, one of the things that we've got out of India now, the next thing we have to deal with is caste discrimination, right? The caste system. And people like William Wilberforce was talking about that as well. But when you talk about, you know, to the general MPs who don't maybe have a large community, who's, you know, members of parliament or members of the Lords who don't represent communities where there are large amounts of Asian people, is that a lot of them have been fooled into thinking that actually caste isn't any different to class, right? But it is different, because you have that concept or the principles of who is touchable and who is not touchable. And you have the social divisions, almost like an apartheid system, and segregation and exclusion in a way that you don't get with class, because you can, you know, go up the class ladder. You may still be not liked by the privileged classes, but you can do that. You can have that social mobility. But I think the problem we have is that, you know, for Dalits, for untouchables, so-called untouchables, is that we don't have, you know, so we're trying to kind of explain that, you know, to them and differentiate. And I think that's quite an important thing that we've been doing.
Thank you, Santosh. And to add to that, it's been a self-exploratory process for us. I mean, nobody told us this is how you get accreditation to attend United Nations meetings. We've all had to do this ourselves. So it's all self-learning. Even though you may have international organizations that say they work with Dalits, I mean, we've had to do everything we've done ourselves. So, you know, it's all off our own backs. And getting to the United Nations, something I realized immediately was that the organizations that were there, because I was networking, talking to a whole range of different organizations, many of the representatives do not have your best interest at heart. They are funded by particular funders, and their main focus is on securing funding so their role continues. So when it came to particular talks, we were observing and listening. The, you know, the NGOs that were meant to be lobbying was standing with their hands behind their backs. They weren't doing anything, and we were a little bit shocked, and we saw that ourselves. And, you know, working with Dr. Raj Chan, we were out there, Mr. Memmi, you know, collaring the Indian representative and pitching a case, coming back to Santosh. And I was shocked that that left a you know, a lasting legacy with me. It's like, why these groups? You know, we put our faith and hope into these groups, and they're doing nothing. When it came to ask a question, they didn't even raise their hands. So one thing I realized is that if we're going to do this as Dalits, we have to do it ourselves. And you could say that's maybe, you know, a pro-Dalit approach. So, you know, so be it. But, you know, if you don't have Dalit women at the front or Dalit men who are at the front of these organizations, raising the questions on their behalf or their communities, nobody else is going to do it for us, right? And that's something I found, and you know, I'm happy to challenge anybody on that, really. And the other thing I found is with British politicians, many of them know what's going on. I remember me and Santosh, we've had meetings with hundreds of politicians, and I don't mind saying this because it's true, but Sadiq Khan, I remember when he gave us, he's the current mayor of London, 2 minutes of his time, and most of the time, the 2 minutes he gave us was looking at his watch. You know, and the first thing he said is, oh, we're not going to touch caste discrimination, an election is coming up, and that's it. You know, so it was very disheartening, because when we're focusing and campaigning on an issue of truth, right, for victims, is that politicians will have their own agendas. They want to get back into power as well, and they want communities to vote for them. That's something to bear in mind, actually. You will have that, right? If people think, oh, we don't want to rock the boat with this issue because we need the support from the Hindu or the Sikh communities, then that's what will happen. I mean, we worked very closely with Jeremy Corbyn. You know, before he got into a leader, we had hundreds of meetings with him. We knew him on a, you know, first name basis. He would ring us and talk to us. Whilst he was leader of the Labour Party, it was slightly different, you know, very different, actually, you know. So it's something to bear in mind that politicians have their own agendas as well, but the real genuine decent ones will fight on your behalf. They will raise this, you know, and they will follow it through. And that's something to bear in mind as well, is sometimes the letdown can be from the political system, and politicians are after votes at the end of the day. Some of them are genuine ones, and that's something to bear in mind.
And I would add also is that when we started this campaign, we were campaigning to the Labour Party. You know, they were in power at the time. sort of asking them to legislate against caste and caste discrimination. And then and it was the Tories and the Liberal Democrats who were helping us at the time. You know, Baroness Wasi was one of our champions. Lynn Featherstone from the Liberal Democrats, you know, was another champion. And when we got the Section 95A, the Labour Party just before an election said, fine, they knew it was kind of like a sensitive area because they didn't want to legislate. You know, they had enough people telling them, don't introduce this legislation. Then as soon as you had a coalition government of the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats wanted to try and push it. We had some really good champions like my mentor, Lord Eric Avery, the late Lord Eric Avery and others. But they were being halted by the Conservatives who already had people like Priti Patel and Lord Poppet and Lord Dalakir, and a number of these members of the Lords and Parliament, Alok Sharma and all of these people, who we believe may have influenced, the decision on this. Now, and then when the Conservatives came in themselves, they kind of made a commitment that they will repeal the law. So basically the politics has changed. And also, I was looking for the Hindu Forum, I think it was the Hindu Forum of Britain's report, and I looked on their website. If you go on their website and you see their, on the images, you've got, the head of the forum, and then you have Priti Patel MP, you have Lord Poppet, you have somebody else, so these are kind of key players in government. I think even Mr. Shah, Alok Sharma, MP. So I can't remember if I saw him, but what I'm saying is that, these people are quite happy to be there and photographed. And what I find quite alarming is that, like I said, the narrative has changed. But what really shocked me as somebody who'd grown up here and had seen the race riots and the National Front, the far right here, the British National Party, sort of, going through Southall, which is a few, miles from where I live. And a policeman being killed there, Blair Peach, at the time. So you have a strong movement of sort of anti-fascism and anti-far right. And then for the Hindu Council of Temples to invite to a meeting of theirs, which had on the agenda caste discrimination law, but also to invite a man called, what's his name? I've forgotten his name now.
Tommy Robinson.
Sorry?
Tommy Robinson?
Tommy Robinson, that's it. Yeah. And we had to protest, as ACDA and other groups saying,
far right, right? Far right.
Yeah. Yeah, how can you even dream of having this person here in a town in Southall where you've lost, where the struggle for equality has begun on this.
So we've got the Commonwealth Games taking place here in Birmingham next year, and I recently applied for tickets. And so on the website, I expressed the tickets that I wanted, and before, I came to submit, there was an option to make a donation. So I looked at this question for a long time, and I decided not to make a donation. I thought, well, no, it's going to be a fair and equitable system. I should be allocated something, and I should have expected it, but I didn't get the tickets. They were declined. Whereas, friends told me that you've got to make donations if you want to get anything in this country. And this applies to politics as well. So Santosh touched on, we being landless laborers coming here, not having money, having to send money back to pay for our families there to get them standing on their feet. We haven't got big businesses to the same extent, or ample money in which to make donations to political parties, because political parties are interested in big business. Right, that's where their interest is first. And I don't want to sound like a cynic in saying this, but through my experience, I'm realizing that a bit of money helps to grease the wheels. It certainly does.
Swati, would you like to ask your question next, please?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much, Nisha, and thank you both Ravi and Santosh for this really enriching conversation. And I just finished my doctorate, and I live in Belgium. I come from a Dalit background, from Maharashtra, and this has been an ongoing struggle as a researcher activist coming from India, to know how do we, aside from our differences, diversity that comes with region, languages and everything, and our political ideologies are so diverse as a Dalit community, how do we make sure that we mobilize, organize together as pan-Dalit, like you mentioned, Ravi, and have you as a group, as an organization, tried that within UK or the diaspora across the globe, and what has been, or connecting with Dalits in India, and what have been your experiences? Have you faced any resistance, and like, just want to know what have been your experiences, because we are fighting for the rights from every corner of the world, but it takes a long time for us to connect. And that's been a struggle. Like, we are on isolated plateaus, and how do we make sure that we come together, acknowledging our diversities, acknowledging those intersectionalities that make us.
The way I can answer it is from my experience. So in the past, I've been approached to join WhatsApp groups, online forums. Two that stand out in my mind was 50 Million Girls, and there was one recently called the Rights Collective. Now, the Rights Collective was looking at the experience of South Asian women and LGBTQ communities as well, and caste, but in particular with caste. And I remember that before the group even started, I only shared one or two links, which basically talked about caste discrimination, caste legislation, and that one basically making it clear I was from a Dalit community. And I was asked to leave the group because I was too knowledgeable about the subject, which was shocking. So, and I was stunned by this. And so I obviously left with a piece of my mind, giving them a piece of my mind as well. But this is what you will come across. And I found this about the 50 million missing women on Twitter as well, in an exchange we had where, I was focusing on the caste element of rapes that happen on women, that it's often, Dalit women by so-called upper caste men, whereas they were keen to focus it on a gender issue. Whereas I was saying, my position was, well, then you're neglecting the power, relationships that exist within villages that allows this to happen. So there are organizations out there, not all of them may want to address or embrace the Dalit or caste issue as well, Jasmine. So you can have a search. I mean, you've got Calm and Nirvana, which is one you can search for. And there's a whole range of others you will come up in the UK. I can't give you all the names right now. A quick search and you'll be able to find them. But when it comes from a Dalit perspective, they'll certainly welcome our support, but they may not really want to touch on the caste element or what Dalits experience, which obviously is difficult for us.
I mean, moving on from what Ravi just said, Yasmin, I think the South All Black Sisters is an excellent organization. And in fact, they supported us with an employment tribunal that we actually ended up settling out of court. But, the director, Pragna Patel, is an old school colleague of mine. We were at school together in the same year. So I think our school made a lot of activists. So I would go to them. As far as educating people about caste discrimination, I think that was the other element of your question. Certainly, there are a lot of organizations. I mean, the ACDA is one. Come to us. If you feel like you want us to come out into your community to talk about what we understand to be caste and caste discrimination, we're very happy to do that. You know, we've done that with the NHS recently in Scotland, you know, where we've educated, I think, probably the top management team in the unions and the HR people. So, you know, we're one organization, but there are others like Caste Watch, Dalit Solidarity Network, Voice of Dalit International, you know, who will, you know, that you could approach and see what they say. As far as sort of like, you know, on your sexual orientation, it's, I'm sure you might have approached groups, but we haven't, it's not an issue that we picked up in ACDA, but certainly, you know, our philosophy is about being inclusive. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, or your age is, or your, you know, your gender is. You know, caste discrimination touches people, you know, no matter what they are, basically. So that you know, that would be it. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but do come back to me if it doesn't, and then please do write to us, and we're happy to see if we can try and help you. Nisha, you asked a really important question about, you know, sort of engaging with academics. And, you know, we were really, really lucky to have people like Dr. Roger Green and Professor Stephen Whittle, who've done a lot of work on transgender issue, actually, you know, and of course, our beautiful Annapurna Wagre. She was the first person to write the modern law review paper, you know, around the time that we wrote our report. So her paper and our paper really, really helped. But there is caste discrimination in institutions, you know, whether it's in India or here or in America even. I would expect wherever you have an Asian diaspora, you're going to get that. And you also asked if there's some kind of, you know, that there aren't enough, you know, Dalit, you know, sort of academics. Well, actually, you know, my friend, Dr. Suraj Yengde is one strong voice. And my other, you know, person that I see as a role model is Dr. Meena Kandaswamy. You know, she has a voice like a lioness, you know, and there are others, you know, those are people, you know, that are here, that are incredibly active, not only as academics, but, you know, because they've published books, but also because they're incredibly vocal about caste issues, and they tell it like it is. And that's what you need sometimes. You need that, you know, short, sharp shock. The other question, Shruti, was how do we make a difference? And I think Ravi, and you talked about Shruti from Belgium, and you talked about how can we be a bit more joined up, sort of like not only in countries, but, you know, that we live in, but also on an international front. And I genuinely believe that we're getting there slowly. You know, Ravi's talked about some of the challenges of getting the Dalit groups themselves joined up. I mean, I'm the chair of the Anti-Caste Discrimination Alliance, but I'm also the president of the Federation of Ambedkarites and Buddhist Organizations UK. And one of the things that, you know, that we, you know, the Ambedkarites are quite good at is actually reaching out to other Ambedkarites. And those Ambedkarites are many, and you know, around the world, and they've been awakened for a long time, because, you know, Baba Sahib Ambedkar did so much for them, and you know, that they want to kind of carry on with the mission. So sort of making sort of like links with the other Dalit organizations, you know, like, and Dalit groups and Dalit religious groups in a pan organization, or raising our voice. And it doesn't need to be a pan organization. It's like coming together, you know, when there are things that kind of concern us. And you know, Ravi's worked really hard on that. But alongside that, you know, every time we've needed to do a joint statement, you know, we've had the Valmiki community, we've had the Ambedkarite community, you know, and the Indian Workers Associations, you know, the rationalists and so on, you know, coming under one banner, whether it's on caste discrimination or about getting the Bhima Corrigan detainees released. The incarceration is inhumane. You know, you've had one of those detainees has died, and there will be others, people like Dr. Anand Teltumde, who will die, and you know, unless they come out, you know, because they're old, they're in their 70s, and they're being kept in condition, you know, sort of without bail, you know, on charges that that even you know, that the parliamentarians here in the UK and at the UN and EU level are challenging. And so, you know, when we want to come together on those sort of issues, we come together. When we want to protest, we come together, you know, as well. You know, we've had very small protests in the beginning. We've only had like 20 people out there with placards, you know, outside Parliament in 2010, in January, on a cold January morning. And then later on, as the campaign went on in 2013, you have thousands of people in Parliament Square, you know, doing it. So the enthusiasm is there. It's just kind of like looking and finding and being in touch with the, I hope that helps a little bit.
And maybe to add, Shruti, a good book to read is by MC Raj called Dalitology. I remember reading that, and I met MC Raj, a wonderful human being, before he passed. And he looked at the commonalities amongst Dalits and tribal communities and the cultural similarities that we have. A bit similar to African Americans. If you look at them, they have a shared history and a heritage, you know, and that's something that his book focuses on. So there is a common thread that draws us together, even though we may have language, region, which separates us, and religion. But looking at our cultural aspects, you know, Dalitology, I certainly believe that's, you know, a common thread that does bring us together and will continue to bring us together.
And the other, you know, just also one of the other things that, you know, Ravi and I, we talked about in the ACDA team, but because we always kind of talk about our time being incredibly precious, and, you know, how do you, you know, when you got lots of other things on, is to do this, is that we're not very good at kind of promoting ourselves as people, in the sense that, you know, that there's some really incredible people, you know, like Ravi and Raj Chand and you know, others in the UK, you know, who are doctors, who are physicians, who are you know, heading up NGOs and so on, and we don't go out and kind of like shout, you know, and trumpet our achievements in the same way that the other groups who've been here, you know, is talking about, you know, about their achievements, whether it's in business or in education or it's in you know, in the NHS. And, you know, and they're constantly giving themselves, you know, sort of awards and, you know, having these award ceremonies and things. And you get that within the Hindu groups and the Sikh groups and so on. But even within the Asian groups, and very rarely do you get an Asian, you know, a Dalit Asian who's recognized for anything, you know. So maybe what we need to do is start, you know, we're here now. We've been in this campaign for a long, long time. And a lot of us support a lot, not only to the campaign, but have helped change the lives of a lot of people for the better. And you know, we need to be doing more there.
Thank you. Do you have time for one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, over to you, Mudit.
So I just wanted to follow up on the question Jasmine asked, and the build up to her question was around the Jat community. Whatever the Jat community claims as their clan or inherited privilege or inherited honor or bravery or courage, the idea of organizing around caste in India is so inherent in everything, including in social policy. For example, the word panchayat or the village council also comes from caste organizations that predate our constitution. And so, which is exactly what is now manifesting in the farm protests right now, anti-farm laws protest right now. And also in how Indian society at large responded to Nodeep Kaur's arrest as well, who was a Dalit Sikh woman. So yeah, my question was, how do we end up, when especially the question around anti-caste activism is coming from a cross-faith context, how do we formulate like an argument where we have people who are speaking against the larger institution like the Indian government. So in that, how do we bring like I know it's a very abused word, but how do we bring the nuance that there are inequalities within like something like an anti-farm law protest as well?
I'm starting with this, somebody. I mean, I've struggled with this a little bit. I mean, we've had a lot of solidarity with the farmer protests in Punjab and Delhi. And the approach we've taken has been that it's a farmer and farm worker protests with a focus on the farm workers. But you know, we cannot deny the experiences of farm workers in the Punjab and other parts of India. The perspective I'm coming from is that we have to work with the OBC communities and the Sudra communities as well, but it has to be on an equal platform. And from my view, caste discrimination comes from an issue in the mind. It's a mental problem, right? It's people who believe, and you know, I mean, caste is a social construction at the end of the day. I mean, if you look at universal laws, gravity is a universal law. You know, you can travel through the sound barrier. That's consistent. But caste is something that's created and unique to India. So it's socially constructed, right? So it's in the minds of people who carry that. And if people are continuing to abuse, mete out social boycotts and rape women and take advantage and steal land, right? But they want change. Who are they asking change for? They want a better footing for themselves, but not for the people that are also being abused. That can't be sustainable. That, you know, there's not going to be real change. People say, oh, we want independence, we want our separate country. But if you don't change your mindset first, nothing will change. And this is the problem with caste and why it's survived for 3,000 years. It's pernicious, right? It reaches every aspect as well. So this is something that has to be addressed, right? And I'm keen to say, well, hold on, this can't carry on. You want equality, you got to give it out first. So it is an important issue. And, you know, I'm open to ideas and how to overcome this, but I don't think any solidarity is going to be long lasting. And even in some of the protests we've seen, there's been issues with Dalit protesters who have been refused food, marginalized. Obviously, they've been in tears on YouTube, and Navdeep Kaur, right, who was arrested and assaulted by the police, was fighting for the rights of workers, you know, and there wasn't a massive outcry for this, you know. Where were all the placards, you know, people beating a drum, you know, for her human rights, because it was clear she was a Dalit woman. And so it is very upsetting here. And I think that the caste mindset is entrenched, not only in India, but Pakistan, you know, and I work with Pakistani communities here, and there's a strong Pakistani Jat community. I mean, the number plates here, when you walk about in the UK, you got privatized number plates saying Jat number 1 with a Pakistani flag, right? So it is entrenched in the mindset. And I often struggle and think, well, do I want to bring my children up in this world where I'm having to teach them about the caste? I don't want to teach them about the caste system, you know, so it's difficult. But you know, these people that follow this, they've got to be called out as well. And if they're not unwilling to change, then, you know, we have to make that change where, you know, we can either work with people, you know, you're going to work with somebody who's going to continue to abuse you. That's not sustainable neither. So I'm open to suggestions and ideas around this, but it is something that we should address, I think, collectively.
Now, you know, we know, you know, that we support the struggle for, you know, any issues to do with things that will change the lives of people in a negative way. But also at the same time, I think, you know, you have to, you know, like Ravi said, is that, you know, a lot of our people don't have land. You know, my family was lucky enough to have land in Punjab, but not everybody has land. And they have to go out and work as daily laborers. And when people work as daily laborers, and when women work as daily laborers, it doesn't matter whether it's in Punjab, because the farmers' protest isn't about Punjab only. I know it's a lot of Punjabi people sitting on the border there of Delhi, but actually, you know, you've got, you know, farmers from Gujarat, from Rajasthan, from all over the place. Oh, Rajasthan is such a beautiful country. The way they farm is absolutely beautiful, I think, to a degree, because they go back to natural way of farming. You know, you don't get these, you know, these fires, you know, that ruin the environment as you get in Punjab and so on. So the farmer movement is about, you know, laws that are going to open things up to the market and capitalism, you know, in India in a way that is going to affect the lives of these people, you know, who've had the privilege of doing that. When you talk about laborers, manual laborers, whether they work on farms, and women, whether they work on farms, or it doesn't matter which part of the country it is, or whether they're working as laborers, as cleaners, or in homes or in factories, they get abused. So our concern really is for people and women, me particularly. I mean, I get absolutely alarmed at the stories that I hear. You have to have a really thick skin. There are things that keep me awake. When I see something, sometimes I see a horrific story and read about it, and I can't switch it off for days, and it impacts on you. Maybe we should just kind of switch off for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and not think about any of it, but it's there. And the farmer struggle is a complex, and it's a shame that Lek isn't here, because actually his take on it is excellent. But also, if you go back to, the Sikh scriptures and Guru Nanak, hundreds of years ago, he talked about Jati and Varna and so on, how we're totally against this. And Guru Ravidas is my other hero, talks about a Begumpura, a land, where you're free of this, these clutches of caste and these divisions and inequalities, to move forward. So, we just need to kind of take the narrative back and try not to let the propaganda that's kind of out there, about, it's a Portuguese word, casta. Of course, we know that. I've got books on my shelf, that go back to the Brits, going out there and experiencing caste. We've got our people, Dalits. A lot of Dalits gave up their lives, for the British Army, to fight against fascism, right? But you know what? The army gave them, like Dr. Ambedkar's father, who was, was quite high ranking in the army, the privilege of having, not the privilege, but the right to have an education, which they'd not had, in a way that, and a little bit of finance and security in order to build people like Dr. Ambedkar. And this is what we need to do. You'll never have another Dr. Ambedkar, in my view, I think, because he was incredibly unique on so many levels. Not only on his intellect, his academic achievements, the amount of books that he wrote, the legal changes that he made, how he promoted women's rights, and how, even in 1936, I heard that he introduced the contraception legislation. Can you imagine in 1936 in India, a man being brave enough to do that? So, we have excellent role models, like I said, like Meena Kandaswamy and, Suresh Yangde and others, and lots of books out there. If people want to learn and read, get out there and look.
Thank you. I'm just struck by this system of oppression we're talking about is, at one level, yes, I mean, it seems so obvious what we can do, but as someone who works in the field of education and formal education and trains teachers and has done so in many different countries and cultural contexts, I'm also reminded of how powerful this institution of oppression and domination is, right? I was not taught about Ambedkar. 20 years of education in India, Ambedkar was a footnote, right? And so and what you just said, I think, Santosh, why should we have to educate ourselves? And why do we have to make our case on the terms of the oppressor? Right? And that's also, so there are these really complex issues. As an educator, who struggles with these issues, and even well-intentioned students, this way of thinking that some of us are inherently superior and some of us were born inferior is so deeply ingrained, right? That even well-intentioned so-called progressive students, once we get into the nitty-gritties of this, the resistance comes, right? And they're not even aware that they're resisting and denying on so many different levels. And I think for me, again, I mean, the 14 years that I spent in the United States, and I'm speaking here, I think, to Jasmine's question as well. That's what I took away from the struggles of people of color in the US, right? Whether it was Black or Latina or First Nations, that part of this is not fighting the fight on their terms. We have to, reframe this discussion on our terms, on our silenced historical, all of our knowledges and experiences that have been systemically silenced and will continue to be silent. And it's going back to the earlier points about whether it's popular culture or who controls the media. Suraj Yengde writes these beautiful books, but if you've heard him talk about how hard he has had to fight to get published, right? And how he now sees himself, one of his roles is opening those gates, and how hard it is. So, I feel so fortunate to have had this opportunity to engage with both of you today. Thank you. We're well over time. Sorry, you've given me the perfect excuse, Santosh, to share my Meena Kandasamy slides. I wasn't going to, but if you'll just indulge me for a minute, because I didn't know whether we'd have time, and I couldn't decide which of her quotes I like better. So I'll just just draw on these powerful words. This one, "You wouldn't discuss me," is an excerpt because my suffering was not theoretical enough. Now I'm theoretical enough, I'm theatrical enough. I have learned these big words. I can use them with abandon. I can misuse them. I can refuse them. I think that's what, we're sort of talking about all of that. And that's the work you guys are doing, speaking truth to power, going against the grain, but you've also mastered the tools of the oppressor, as Audre Lorde talks about, right? And the second excerpt that I was looking at as I was preparing for our conversation today, ours is a silence that waits, endlessly waits, but sometimes the outward signals of inward struggles takes colossal forms, and the revolution happens because our dreams explode. So thanks, Santosh. Such powerful words. Thanks for giving me an excuse to actually go there at the end. If you have closing words, we'd be most happy to listen to them, but I want to be respectful of your time. So if you'd like to close now, that's fine as well.
Can I just finish very, very quickly? I just want to say thank you for having the opportunity to have this conversation, and all the work that you've done in the lead up to it to get to know us a little bit, which is all time consuming. So I think you've done a great service. The other thing that I've gone away with from here is that there are people like Mudit and Nisha and others like you who want to see change happen, and we are thankful, and we need to reach out to more, because there are lots more, and we do reach out, and there are people who are willing to listen to us and understand where we're coming from, and for us to be able to politely challenge. We're not up, we're not up there, on a war footing, because there are a lot of people, good people, and we need to reach those, and for them to make a difference, as well, because once they start raising their voice, and that time will come, like in the Black Lives Movement, when the George Floyd murder happened, you had all of these Bollywood actors and actresses, others, coming out there saying, oh, this is awful, and so on. I wait for the moment when you have, the lynching of Dalit men, and, rapes of Dalit women, punishment rapes of Dalit women, are seen in the same outrage, by these people, so-called personalities, and people who, everybody kind of goes to. So I would like to end on that, sorry, but thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share our work and our views with you.
Thank you, it was an honor. Shall we close there then? All right. Everyone stay safe, stay well. Please keep in touch now that we've connected. Take care. Thank you again very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.